Chapter 20. Questions and Answers. Question. Was the statement given by Jane while speaking for you correct, that there have been millions of speakers, or was that distorted? Answer. It was not distorted. The speakers are gifted according to their own characters, some having far more abilities than others, but all playing roles in the communication of inner data. In your terms, therefore, some speakers would be much more accomplished than others. For example, there have been a far smaller number of truly prominent speakers than the number given. There have been less than 30 great speakers. The Christ entity was one. The Buddha was another. These speakers are as active when they are non-physical as when they are physical. The Christ entity had many reincarnations before the emergence of the Christ quote-unquote personality as known, as did the Buddha. The greatest speakers do not only translate and communicate inner data, but also go much further into these inner realms of reality than others connected with your physical system. They add then to the basic inner data. The greatest speakers have not needed the intensive training necessary for most. Their unique combination of characteristics has made this unnecessary. At another level, Emerson was a speaker. A man named Marbundo in Africa, 14 BC. The speakers, more than most, are highly active through all aspects of existence, whether physical or non-physical, waking or sleeping, between lives or at other levels of reality. As certain physical data are carried along in the gene structure, so this inner information is codified within whatever psychological structures the speakers may inhabit, but far more readily available than it is to other personalities. It needs often trigger points to release it, however. These can take place either in the waking or dream state, and they serve to open up the reservoirs of knowledge and make past training available. I know that one of your questions has to do with the first speaker. Yes. Question. Is it possible to name or describe a first speaker? Answer. Now, in greater terms, there was no first speaker. Imagine that you wanted to be 10 places at once, and that you actually sent one portion of yourself to each of these 10 places. Imagine that you could scatter yourself in those 10 directions, and that each of the 10 portions were conscious, alert, and aware. You, being the 10 of you, would be aware of existence in each of the 10 places. It would be impossible to ask which of the 10 arrived first, except to say that all began with the original who decided to visit the 10 locations. So it is with the speakers, in the same way who do not originate in the locations or in the times in which they may appear. Do you have any more speaker questions? Question. What is the original source of the speaker data? Where did it come from, and when? Answer. The original source of the speaker data is the inner knowledge of the nature of reality that is within each individual. The speakers are to keep the information alive in physical terms, to see that men do not bury it within and dam it up, to bring it, the information, to the attention of the conscious self. They speak the inner secrets, in other words. In some civilizations, as mentioned earlier in this book, they played a much stronger part, practically speaking. At times, they were consistently, consciously, and egotistically aware of this information. It was then that it was mentioned. They realized it was always available at an unconscious level. They imprinted it, however, upon the physical brain through the use of memory. There was always great interaction, however, between inner and outer existence for them, as there is today. Valid information gained in the dream state was memorized in the morning. One speaker heard another's lesson in the dream state. On the other hand, pertinent physical data was also communicated one to another in the dream state, and both states were utilized to a high degree. Do you have any more speaker questions? Question. Were any of the disciples speakers? Answer. I will save that one for the religious chapter. It can be handled more simply. Question. Can speakers work with us while they are between physical lives? Answer. I believe that has been answered. They can and do indeed. Both of you are being trained by other speakers who are themselves between lives, this occurring in your dream states. The speakers themselves obviously attain varying degrees of efficiency. Question. Who is training us? Have we known them in past lives, etc.? Answer. The large amount of their work is done from a non-physical state, earthly existences being somewhat like very important field trips. Question. Wouldn't you say then that these sessions are speaker training for Jane and me, raised to a conscious level? Answer. They are indeed. The inner information must be consciously recognized. In your terms, by the time an individual is in his last physical life, all portions of the personality are then familiar with it at the time of death. The personality is not swept willy-nilly back to another earthly existence, as might be the case otherwise. The consciously, physically oriented portions of the self become acquainted with the inner information. To some extent, the reality of the thought is consciously perceived as the innovator behind physical matter. Such an individual then can understand the nature of hallucinations at the point of death, and with full conscious awareness enter into the next plane of existence. The information made conscious is then passed on to others where it can be physically recognized and applied. Question. You told us you were going to elaborate upon what you perceive when you are speaking through Jane to a room full of people. In that ESP class session, you mentioned going into a trance yourself and the effort required by you to pinpoint us in our time and space. Answer. I perceive people in a room in a far different manner than they perceive themselves. Their various past and future reincarnated personalities, but not their probable selves, are perceivable to me. I quote-unquote see the reincarnated aspects, the various manifestations taken in that regard. In your terms, it would be as if you saw a series of quickly moving pictures, all representing various poses of one personality. I must remember, in all communications with those in the room, to limit my remarks and focus to the specific reincarnated quote-unquote present self. I see this composite image myself. It is not recognized by Rupert's eyes, which do not have the multidimensional depth perception necessary. I see the composite image clearly, whether or not I am looking through Rupert's eyes. I use his eyes because they narrow down the focus for me to the one quote-unquote present self of which the individual is aware. Communicating with your system in such a manner demands great diligence and greater discrimination, according to the quote-unquote distance of the communicator from the physical system. I am not based within the physical system, for example. The discrimination comes to bear upon the precision needed to enter your reality at the precise time, the precise point in time and space upon which you are concentrated. Present and future experience of those in the room are available to me, and as real as their present experience. Therefore, I must remember what they think has already happened or not yet occurred, for to me it is one. These patterns of activity, however, are also constantly changing. I say, for example, that I am aware of their past and future actions and thoughts, and yet what I am aware of actually are ever-shifting and changing patterns, both in the future and in the past. Some of the events that I see connected very clearly with these persons in the future may not in your physical system occur. They exist as probabilities, as potentials, actualized in thoughts, but not turned into definite physical form. I told you that no events are predetermined. I would have to tune into a future date in your terms, and probe it with all of its ramifications in order to ascertain which of the probable actions I saw in your earlier would be actualized in your later. To a large extent, the methods of communication may vary. A personality based within a physical reality, between lives for example, would find entry in many ways easier. The information he would be able to give, however, would also be limited because of his experience. I do have a memory of physical existence, however, and this automatically helps me in translating your mental data into physical form. I do perceive objects, for example. Using Rupert's mechanism is of great help here also. At times, I see the room and the people as he, or rather his perceptive mechanisms do. In this case, I translate or read that data and use it as you might a computer's. Question. Are you going to tell us about some of the ways you contacted Jane before the sessions began? Answer. I mentioned some of that in an earlier chapter. Much of her training as Jane took place in the dream state. There were frequent out-of-body projections in which she attended classes, taught initially by various speakers. The information gained was often brought to conscious layers through the poetry. There was concentrated training that allowed her to focus inward, an exterior environment that forced her to look inward for answers, and a strong religious structure in which initial growth could take place. Question. Do you have any interest in perceiving our daily lives when you are not speaking through Jane? Is it possible? Answer. I do not make it a practice to observe. We are connected, however, in one psychological gestalt, and so I am aware of any intense feelings on your part or strong reactions of any kind. This does not mean that I am necessarily aware of all events within your lives, or that I always break down the feelings I receive from you into specifics. I am generally aware, therefore, of your condition. If anything upsets Rupert, he automatically sends me messages about it. I am aware, within the limitations mentioned, of future events in your lives. I am much more concerned with your overall spiritual vitality than I am with what you had for breakfast.